What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Decred in Depth. On today's show, we have Liz from Ditto PR. Liz, how you doing?
Hello, I'm very good, and it's a very big honor to be on Decred in Depth, finally.
Of course. So Liz, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the crypto space.
Certainly. So, hello, everybody. I'm Liz. Really excited to be on the podcast. I'm somebody who's been participating in the Decred community for a little under a year now. And to give you a little bit of an introduction by way of who I am and what my role is in the community. So, I represent Ditto PR, which is a team, a motley crew, a band of folks who have been working with Decred for a while now. I'm sort of in charge of strategy when it comes to communications and media relations and events. And when we first started working together with Decred, this was December 2018, Decred had a pretty sparse media presence and a very technical product and project that wasn't really being communicated in a cohesive or understandable to the layman way. And that's the background for why I and Ditto, which includes Leslie Ankney and Anastasia Golovina, Margaret Huang, and Trey Ditto, to come in and work with Decred. So that's kind of the backstory on where we are now. A lot has happened since then. I know we'll get into that a little bit later. But for me personally, how I got into crypto, I like to think that I'm an intellectually curious person, and I've also noticed something special about the Decred community, which is everybody there is the same way. And I think that's what led me to crypto ultimately, although the way that I got there is pretty roundabout. I think of myself as a translator of sorts. I started out as a translator of Russian at a newswire. I lived in Moscow for a few years after I graduated college, and that involved a lot of, translating language from one language to another. But then that led me down the rabbit hole of doing PR for Russian companies, which involved translating as well. And that's interesting in terms of connections to crypto, because now I think of myself as a translator of the complexities of blockchain and crypto to a lay audience. And a lot of the work that I do with Decred is taking something that is made up of very many moving parts. There's governance, there's the concept of store of value, there's the developer angle, there's the contributor angle. There are so many things to say that my job is to break that all down into language that somebody who doesn't know Decred would understand, and to ultimately get them excited about the project. So my career in blockchain PR actually took off at the end of 2017, which was during the token sale craze. I knew nothing about blockchain and crypto before I got into it. I had heard a lot about it. It was becoming really popular in Silicon Valley, where I was based at the time. And so I basically had to bring myself up to speed by frantically watching videos of Vitalik, which, love it or hate it, my introduction was trying to understand smart contracts, trying to understand, more importantly, the important context of it. Why should a person who's not into crypto care about it? So basically, I started working with a company that was doing real estate on the blockchain. And the next day, I had to call the Wall Street Journal and explain to a reporter who had never heard of blockchain what blockchain is, what the technology means, what cryptocurrency is, and found myself like the blind leading the blind. But ultimately it landed in a feature story for my client. And it was a really big deal because this was right when the mainstream media was trying to wrap their brains around what this technology is. And I felt that I was playing a really important role in that. And so this was at another PR agency that I worked at. And then Trey Ditto approached me to go all in on crypto. I said yes. And shortly thereafter, I started working with Decred. So I'm now in charge of our crypto practice here at Ditto, which, while we're not a crypto PR firm per se, we are very, very well versed in crypto. And personally, it's what I do all day, every day. So that's where I am today.
Understood. So what would you say is a basic definition of what PR is and some of its responsibilities?
I think the best way to answer that question is to tell you first what PR is not. PR is not sales, and it's not marketing. And we're definitely not here to shill coins. Now, unfortunately, I'm sure everyone in the community has seen this play out on Twitter. There is a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of what the role of PR is. Fortunately, I found that with Decred, the community understands that actually what PR is it's three things. So number one, PR is clearly communicating what you do and why. So what is Decred first and foremost? Why does it do what it's doing? And who is it trying to target? Why does it matter? So that's number one. It's just clearly communicating with the external folks who might be interested so that they understand. Number two, and this is pretty closely intertwined with what I just said, it's educating your target audiences. Education is really important. Shilling is not something that's going to really help you accomplish your long-term goals, but what will is making sure that people understand. And one of the first things we did when we started working with Decred was we asked the community, listen, who are you guys trying to target? What are you trying to accomplish? And we realized over time that there are actually several audiences that Decred is trying to reach, be it the developers, be it the folks who are just interested in diversifying their portfolio, be it, hedge funds, or people just enthusiastic about crypto, and also reporters, which is a totally different audience as well. So that's number two. And then number three, what PR is, it's shaping and controlling your own narrative. I have found that many crypto and blockchain projects have let the narrative get away from them because they didn't spend enough effort up front to identify how to talk about themselves. And so that's when, when you've got reporters saying things about your project that are incorrect or inaccurate, you've got nobody there to fix them. And so I think of my job as somebody who communicates to external people about how Decred works, what it does, who they are, so that in the long term, the narrative being told about Decred is accurate and beneficial to the long-term sustainability of the project.
Now, I know you mentioned some of your coworkers at Ditto. When was it founded? What's the backstory? And who are some of the core members involved?
Great question. Ditto has been around for about 7 years. Ditto actually started out not in crypto and blockchain. We have a finance and financial services background. So it all started with Trey Ditto. I'm sure you've all heard about Trey. Ditto is his last name. And Trey got very interested in crypto through friends and through projects that he was familiar with. This was about 2.5 years ago. And we were led down the rabbit hole. And we found that as a motley crew of intellectually curious individuals, crypto and blockchain really resonated with us. A lot of us come from big PR agencies that didn't really do a good job of understanding their clients' businesses or reading the news about what their clients are doing and how their industries operate. And so we found that the PR coming out of these big agencies was often subpar and not really in the service of clients' bigger business objectives. So that's kind of how Ditto got started. And then we ended up in crypto 2.5 years ago. Since then, we've worked with quite a few different projects in the space, ranging from the Ledgers and Moneros of the world to the coin lists and the augurs of the world. And Decred is, of course, one of our favorite projects to work with. And the team that works on Decred, so that's me. I'm mostly in charge of strategy and kind of leading efforts there, and I'm very active in the community, so you all probably recognize my name. It also includes Trey Ditto, who is the CEO of Ditto, Leslie Ankney, who I'm sure you are also familiar with, as she was one of the people who wrote one of the first feature stories about Decred when she was writing for Forbes. So Leslie is now, she's crossed over to the dark side of Ditto PR and working with Decred. She's having a lot of fun. There's also Margaret Wong, who has a very extensive background in tech PR and communications. And then finally, there's the newest arrival, Anastasia Golovina, who has lots of crypto experience as well. So all of us who work with Decred are super into crypto. It's a hobby for us. It's something that we personally find a lot of fulfillment out of. And I got to tell you, the last year has been a wild ride with Decred.
Now, Liz, what's the role of PR in crypto assets, and why do you feel it's important?
Crypto PR is important mainly because it's such an emerging and nascent space that there's a lot of misinformation. And, when you look at the grand scheme of how emerging technologies unfold, it can take years before the real big external stuff starts happening. So I view ourselves right now in education mode. And anytime a crypto project hires a PR person to shill their coin, everyone can see right through it. So I think it's really important when PR firms come into play to understand, what their goals are, what the long-term goals are, and to work towards those. And that basically boils down to each audience getting adequate knowledge and education to participate in the project, especially right now as the new bull market is starting to arrive. And that requires going one level deeper into the differentiators. So for Decred, we've really been spending a lot of time over the last few months on staking and governance and the contractor model and privacy. And so, the smaller projects, and when I say smaller, I tend to mean those that haven't received quite as much mainstream attention yet, not because they're not legitimate, but simply because they're newer players in a very saturated space. It's very important for them to have a clear communications platform, which is why we've spent so much time and effort working with the community on Decred's messaging platform. So ultimately, it's about messaging, educating, and making sure that reporters have the information they need to convey the correct information to their own audiences.
Understood. Now, how was Ditto hired by Decred, and what are some of the challenges you faced within the community?
This is my favorite story ever from working at Ditto. It's incredible, and it's absolutely remarkable and a sign of the community's sophistication that we were able to participate in such an interesting and wildly transparent process. I'm sure most people are familiar, but this all started back, I believe, in November of 2018. We were approached by someone at Decred. I believe it was Dustin, and he basically said, listen, Decred's kind of on the market for a team of people who can assist it with its communications needs, of which there are many, not just PR. And hey, why don't you guys send us a contract or a proposal? And we said, all right, sure. And typically the PR process, the contract process is pretty behind closed doors. That's just how PR operates. We typically will negotiate with the marketing team from the incoming new business lead. We'll talk about price. We'll tell them what we can offer. And then we'll do a little bit of back and forth negotiation. It's usually between no more than, 4 or 5 people. But then we were told, hey, listen, Decred's not about that. Decred's decentralized, and our community wants to know what you guys are offering, how much money, when you're going to do it, and what your KPIs are. Not only that, but we need you guys to talk about it publicly in a time-stamped fashion. And I was like, oh, well, what on earth? And so we decided, hey, listen, we had actually heard a lot about Decred because we've already been in the space for a while. We knew that Decred was an incredibly respected project, and we were ready for it. So we soon found out that we would be participating in this process in competition with another PR firm, which happens to be our biggest competitor in the space. There are not very many firms out there who do crypto PR, so it was both exciting and harrowing to know that we would be competing against Waxman. And so what happened is we both individually as agencies submitted our proposals and got to see behind the curtain of what the other was offering. I've never in my life been able to experience that. It's usually very opaque. And not only that, but we had, I believe, a 7-day period in which the community pummeled us with very difficult questions, all of which were excellent questions. And we had all kind of internally had to answer to ourselves in the past, but never had we been asked to sit down and respond thoroughly, honestly. And not only that, but in a public fashion in front of a very large group of people. So there were 7 days of this, during which time we were on call. I mean, I was on Polytail all the time, and every time a new comment would come in, I'd be like, Ditto team, rally the forces, we've got a question. And, it was basically 24/7, 7 days a week, and incredibly exciting, incredibly exhilarating, but nothing was as exhilarating as the voting process, during which time we were very, very, very close to not reaching approval. Both agencies were back and forth. Sometimes Waxman would be in the lead. Sometimes Ditto would be in the lead. And then Ditto would take a major hit, and then Waxman would get a giant leap. And it was basically like watching sports. And finally, at the end of 7 days, Ditto won. And that was great. It was incredible, but that was the scariest part because we knew that we would be beholden to a large group of extremely intelligent people who understand their shit. So that's where the real work started. And it was very exciting. I love to go back and read the time-stamped comments to see how far we've come. And I love that the community continues to hold us to the promises we made. And the best part of all, though, is I love that our 6-month engagement ended in June, and we had to resubmit a proposal. We had to come up with new ideas and a new strategy, and we won that as well. So, working with Decred has been one of the most challenging, both in terms of the amount of work we do, but also in terms of holding ourselves accountable, but also the most rewarding projects that I personally, and I think Ditto, has ever worked with.
Liz, what are some of the metrics that you use to determine the effectiveness of the work that Ditto provides for Decred?
I think that's the most common question we have gotten. It's a very common question in PR generally, and there are a lot of different answers to it. So I'm going to give you I think more like the Ditto laundry list of ways that we measure effectiveness, and also very open to comments from the community on how they would like to measure effectiveness, because ultimately what matters is that the community feels that we're delivering. But number one, the most obvious measure of success is how much media coverage are we getting? Is Decred in the news? Is it in the news regularly? Did we get Decred a piece of news and then 2 months later it's crickets? Or are we getting a steady drumbeat of coverage? Another metric for success is Decred being mentioned in stories about governance. This has been a very important sort of campaign for us because, maybe 6 to 7 months prior, governance was being written about and Decred was being left in the dust. And so over time, a big priority for us has been whenever there's a governance story, is Decred mentioned? Example, a couple weeks ago, CoinDesk released an article about governance. Decred was mentioned. We didn't even pitch that reporter for that story, but because of the groundwork we have laid and the conversations we've had, he already knew. So that's another metric for success. A couple of others, and this is a very relevant one now, is how much are people engaging with Decred on Twitter? In the last few months, I think that one of the recent Decred journals said that Decred's following alone on Twitter has doubled recently in the past couple of months, which is a huge testament to the community rallying efforts to engage on Twitter. And by the way, that effort has been led by Leslie, who is pretty crypto and Twitter savvy, and she's kind of been rallying the troops there. And then another metric I want to mention is this is a lot more difficult to measure. I want to put that caveat in there, but have people heard of Decred? When you go to an event, let's say you go to some meetup, any crypto meetup, you name it, when you talk to people about Decred, do they know what it is? There are a few groups of people. I like to break it down into 3 groups. There's people who are, 1, wild and crazy about Decred and love it, of which there are many, and I have met them at conferences. Number 2, this is probably the more popular group, is people have heard of Decred for sure, but they don't really know what it stands for. They're like, oh, it's that one coin, which is not very helpful. And those are the people that we need to be educating the most. And then the third group is people who have never heard of Decred. In my anecdotal experience, and I'm sure in the community's experience as well, this group is dwindling. But knowledge of Decred is especially important as we head into the new bull market. And as people consider, what do they want their bag to look like? It's important that people understand the messaging and philosophy underneath Decred, which is in large part the work that Ditto is doing.
Liz, what are some of the creative strategies you guys have come up with or, say, partnered with the DCR marketing team on to effectively push the DCR message across to users?
Great question. The most recent one that comes to mind for me, and the most exciting and exhilarating, I think, is this Twitter engagement strategy that we've been working on with the community. So the community has an incredible group of people who are very active on Twitter. And we, as a PR firm working with Decred, realized that a lot of opportunity was being left on the table in terms of rallying the troops there and educating the regular, Twitter person who talks about crypto. And so we have worked to gather a group of community members who are excited about Twitter. And by the way, this is me saying anybody who's listening right now and wants to be involved in this effort, please let us know, because the more the merrier. we've probably got, I don't know, anywhere between 40 and 50 people right now actively working together to educate people on crypto Twitter. Anytime a topic is talked about that is relevant to Decred, we have kind of a short list. Obviously, one is governance. Another is the concept of contractors working in crypto. Another is privacy. Another is staking. Decred needs to be involved in those Twitter threads. And that essentially means responding to people on Twitter and educating them in a diplomatic and open way about what Decred is and how it's relevant to that topic. Another example of our Twitter engagement strategy is anytime Decred gets written about in the news. For instance, last week there was a crypto briefing story in which Richard Redd was quoted about the way that Decred is funded and its sustainable treasury. Anytime an article like that comes out, Decred needs to make sure that it's sharing those articles across Twitter. Because it's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there, does anyone hear it? If Crypto Briefing writes an article and no one talks about it on Twitter, did it really happen? No, essentially not. So you want to amplify, you want to engage, you want to get conversations going outside of the echo chamber so that the message about Decred is being spread far and wide. And so this has been a very successful strategy so far. We've seen the Decred project's Twitter handle has increased its following. I believe the number was doubled, something pretty significant over the past couple of months. And we've just generally seen a really big uptick in activity around Decred. But the important thing in this whole strategy has been making sure that the way people engage on Twitter is diplomatic, open, transparent, and educational, because what we don't want is just like an XRP army of people shilling the coin all the time. Nobody likes to be shilled at. It's just a fact. It's all about delivering the right messaging at the right time and in a way that makes it feel organic. So that's one creative strategy. Another example of creativity at work when it comes to Decred, and something Ditto does particularly well because we understand the bigger tech space, but we also understand crypto, is we often find big ongoing conversations and we fit Decred into them. So, when Facebook Libra was announced earlier this summer, everybody had an opinion about it. But what's different about Decred is the Decred community is willing to take really strong stances because Decred was founded on certain very strong principles. And so everything the community does is based around these principles. And we were able to get Jake's commentary into some mainstream outlets. One of them was CNBC, another was Mashable. These outlets that have never covered crypto before, we were able to leverage an ongoing conversation and bring Decred into it, while also making sure that what we're giving journalists ties back to what Decred stands for. So Decred stands for privacy, for transparency, for fairness, for decentralization, and that it was really pretty easy for us to position Decred in opposition to a project like Libra simply because of the way that it's structured. So those are two creative ways, but we're always trying to think of bigger contexts in which to fit Decred, because the truth is, we're in this every day. Decred for us is life. and the vast majority of people not only wouldn't understand Decred and haven't heard of it, but they may not understand crypto. And so everything we do every day when we're trying to reach these bigger, more mainstream audiences is we try to fit Decred into what they already understand.
Liz, one of the things I think about, and I wanted to ask you, why do you think there's such a large emphasis on marketing when it comes to all these crypto asset projects?
Well, I think the reason is because we are currently in an incredibly saturated market. There are like 1,600 coins right now. I may be wrong. I know a lot of them went bust this year, but last time I checked, there were 15 to 1,600 different coins out there. So there's often a mistaken belief, unfortunately, that marketing will make up for a crappy project. And shilling is very common right now because it's the only way that some teams find that they're able to rise above the noise, but it's always extremely temporary. So, I would give you the example of Tron, which tends to do these announcements on Twitter. So, the CEO will be like, hey, in a week, I'm going to announce this thing. And so people get all excited and the price gets pumped up. And then the announcement comes and the thunder has kind of been stolen. And not only that, but the announcement may not quite be as exciting as people thought it was going to be. And, you know, this kind of marketing that gets people hyped up without necessarily their substance being underneath it can be problematic in the long term. And that's why it's important to focus on the long game. Some coins and some projects are doing that, but so many of them are not. But again, 5 years from now, which projects will still be around?
Liz, some early adopters of BTC took on the role to market the project in its early days. Yet BTC gained mass appeal and created awareness without a traditional PR firm or even traditional marketing. How do you feel this affects PR firms going forward, and do you feel they're even really needed?
That's an excellent question, and there's a nuanced answer to it. First, I want to address why Bitcoin has been able to build the movement and the following that it has without a PR firm. I have to say that when it comes to first movers, there is a very clear advantage, not just in the business world, but when it comes to marketing and communications. Because when you're the starter of a movement, you don't need PR, especially if you are a movement of people who are willing to drop everything they've got to develop the product and then to create sort of an evangelism around that product. Now, when you get to mover number 2 or mover number 3, and you know, Ethereum is a good example of that, it's a little bit easier to ride the coattails of the mover, but you also need a little more help. And as you get further into the space and the space becomes glutted with coin after coin after coin, it becomes really important to at least bring on a team of people who are dedicated to explaining, number 1, what your project is, and number 2, how your project is different from Bitcoin. Because love it or hate it, this is one of the biggest questions that we always get, one of the hardest questions to answer. But being a first mover does have certain advantages. And so again, I would mention again that shilling is not something that I would ever necessarily recommend for any coin. I think having a strong communications platform, a strong narrative, and an ability to answer some of the fundamental questions like, how is Decred different from Bitcoin? Well, okay, if it's different from Bitcoin, how is it going to get the network effect it needs to compete with Bitcoin, etc.? And these are questions that not just Decred will need to answer, but every player that comes after Bitcoin will need to answer it. The only player that doesn't have to answer that question is Bitcoin.
Liz, now when speaking to media outlets about the DCR project, what are some of the difficulties that you come across, or what are some of the things that they don't quite understand about the project that you feel you have to over-communicate?
The media often asks similar questions. One of them is always, how is Decred different from Bitcoin? Fortunately, the community has a very strong and clear stance on this. It's evolved over time, over the past year, but there's a very fascinating backstory to Decred, and that a lot of the people developing it also came from developing on Bitcoin. And, you know, Jake, having been behind BTC Suite, is a really great and understandable entry into the conversation with journalists. And giving journalists a frame of reference can be immensely helpful. So in that way, Decred is a little bit advantaged. Another question that I get that I scratch my head over every single time is a chicken and an egg question. It's, okay, well, if Decred's so superior to Bitcoin, which, by the way, Decred never said, but often words that get pulled out of our mouth, why don't more people know about Decred? This is a question that gets asked of a lot of projects. It's not a very fair question, and unfortunately we have to answer it, and that usually comes in the form of a lot of the conversations around longevity and the long-term game that Decred is playing, because people who trade coins, you know, day traders, often don't think long term. And unfortunately, the media has been subsumed by this mentality of the stories of the day being driven by price and by the latest news, the latest hire, the latest fire, the latest layoff, the latest hard fork. And it's a little bit difficult to get journalists and anyone, in fact, who is involved in crypto to think longer term. So we often have to make sure that we're having a conversation with journalists around, we're not talking about today, we're talking about 5, 10, 15 years from now. So it's important for them to understand that when we first start talking.
Now, what are some of the steps that are being taken to improve this process and maybe help them understand the project a bit better?
The absolute best possible way to get a journalist to understand something better is to have a phone call with them. And that introductory email where you explain very briefly what Decred is and what its backstory is, it's important, and it's sort of like the wrapping on a gift. You got to make it pretty so that journalists want to open it, right? It's very important, that first introductory email, but the real conversations are happening in those first phone calls with whoever it is. It can be with me, it can be with Jake or Jay-Z or anybody in the community. We've actually media trained, I think, between 9 and 10 people who can all speak to this. And the more touch points we can give a reporter into the different players at Decred, the more they start to get a holistic understanding of it. The Laura Shin podcast, Unchained, which we got Jay-Z from Decred on very recently, was an interesting back process, because we didn't just get Jay-Z on the podcast overnight. No, this was multiple phone calls with Laura. It was walking her through how the project works. It was her talking to Jake and her talking to Jay-Z and her talking to me and her asking lots and lots of questions. And this is good journalism. This is somebody who genuinely wants to understand. And so the longer conversations and the more conversations we can have, the better. So ultimately, this comes down to a long-term sustainable strategy over time where we're talking to reporters about Decred more than once. And I found that, just by sheer virtue of the fact that we've been working with Decred for a little under a year, that's really helped us a lot. And reporters seem to be understanding the project a lot more than they did before.
Understood. Now, Liz, what are some of the steps that you feel DCR needs to take in order to gain more market awareness and mass appeal?
There are several things Decred can do. And, one of the reasons I actually wanted to be on the podcast was to talk to the community about what we can all do together. Because, Ditto doesn't have a monopoly on this. It's something that we were intentionally hired to work with the community on. And we can't really do it without the community. So there are a few things. Number one is be cohesive and clear about the way we talk about Decred. Now, the messaging platform, which we created and have recently refreshed this summer, is a really good starting point. So anytime you're going to have a conversation with anyone, be it a journalist or somebody at a meetup or your best friend, know which audience you're talking to. We have different audience buckets. There's basically, to roughly break it down, there's the people who don't get crypto at all. There's the crypto enthusiasts. And then there's the developers. All those people are going to understand Decred through different prisms. And so you need to understand what is my audience and what is the language I should use to explain Decred to that audience. Another thing that the community can do to help Decred improve its kind of market share and awareness is be empowered to evangelize for Decred on various social media platforms. If you do that on Twitter, Twitter's a great start. It's love it or hate it. It's where crypto lives. So being vocal there in a way that, as I mentioned earlier, is friendly and open and diplomatic and educational is the greatest and most organic possible way to get people interested in understanding Decred. And I think another thing that Decred could do is to prioritize educating a non-Decred audience. Any project can become an echo chamber. That's very normal, but we've realized that the next step in all this is bringing in new people. So we could talk to ourselves all day, and we could talk about what's going on within Decred and what we're excited about, but it's not going to mean anything until the community gets bigger. And that's why we've been creating an educational resources repository on GitHub. So the community has written, recorded, filmed a variety of excellent resources on all of the possible aspects of Decred, ranging from the fact that it's adaptable to its governance model to the way the contributor model works. And so what we're doing is we're gathering up the best of the best resources. We're dropping them into a highly structured framework that will then live on the Decred website so that newbies, like let's say a reporter from Bloomberg who isn't super familiar with crypto, can click on that and learn everything they need to learn about Decred in an understandable way that doesn't overwhelm them. I can't tell you how important that is, and it's been a huge priority for us and for the community as a whole. But a few other things that people could do to help Decred out is don't shill Decred without backing up your claims with evidence or educational materials. That's why the educational resources repository is so important, because some of the best links are going to be there, some of the best Medium posts and the podcasts, all the best stuff is going to be there, easy for you to find, so that if you're on Twitter and you find that you want to educate somebody about how the hybrid consensus model works, well, then you can find the link to the best Medium post and you can pop it in Twitter, and there you go. So those are a few of the things we can do, but over time, it will evolve. Even in the last 6 months, the way that we approach communications with Decred has evolved, simply because the realities on the ground have improved for Decred. And we're also about to enter into a new bull market. So there's a lot more willingness on the part of previously uninvolved media to explore new projects.
Now, Liz, understanding the project so well and working with us for so long, what are some of the things that you might be concerned about when it comes to Decred?
Well, that's a really good question. And the truth is, there's really only one concern for me, and this is not unique to Decred. This is the ability to acquire network effect. And I don't think that it's out of the question. And part of the reason that I'm here, and part of the reason that Ditto was hired in the first place, is to help build a network effect. And Decred has the most engaged community that I particularly have ever worked with. And so how do we multiply that community by a degree of magnitude? It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a while, but it's absolutely crucial. And I also think that, depending on your school of thought, I personally think it's possible for there to be a world in which there's more than one coin. I think a lot of people in Decred believe that as well. And so if that is the reality that we're going to have in the future, where there's a few coins left standing and Decred is one of them, then I absolutely think that this is all achievable. But really, I very strongly believe in the mission of Decred and in the way that the consensus mechanism has been built, the way that the off-chain voting has been built. Everything is so intricate and so incredibly well thought out that I personally also, I'm not a techie. So what can I say? I'm incredibly impressed. I can't find any holes in it. But then again, I'm not a coder.
Liz, what are some of the things that I guess you're most optimistic about when it comes to DCR's future?
I am looking forward to when Decred ultimately becomes the first DAO. And I think that huge strides are being made in that direction. Decred's gotten a lot of attention around the decentralization of treasury spending, and the proposal that was passed earlier this year, moving it closer and closer to becoming that, is so much fun and so inspiring, and also a great conversation starter for journalists and for newbies who may not understand crypto and want to have an intro into what the company of the future looks like. The decentralized company in which you don't even have to know the name of the people you work with. You don't even have to know their location or their background. You can still work with these people, and you can do it without a CEO. That is, to me, the most exciting prospect of Decred that makes it so much bigger than just being another coin.
Well, Liz, I really appreciate you coming on the show. You've been amazing. Do you have a message for newcomers or potential stakeholders?
Certainly. I think I speak for all of Ditto when I say that working with Decred has been one of the most meaningful crypto experiences in my career. And PR firms come and go. And honestly, I hope that Ditto is part of the picture for years to come. At this point, I think I would be emotionally distraught if I were told I couldn't work with Decred anymore. It's become such a part of my day-to-day meaning and my identity. But what matters most to us at this phase of our work with Decred is to empower the community with the tools it needs to promote the project and to educate the public. That's extremely important, and we don't want to hold our cards close to our chest at Ditto. We want the community to participate with us, which is why we're so vocal in the various chat channels. And that, to us, is truly the decentralized ethos, when we can be so transparent and so honest with the community that at any given moment, even if you're not an employee of Ditto, you can help work with Ditto on promoting this project in the long term. And so that's part of the reason I wanted to come on here today. I wanted the community to know that we're in this together. And no matter what happens, I hope that everybody ends up with what they need to push Decred into the very long term.
Incredible. Thank you, Liz. You've been amazing, as always.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.